A homeless boy finds a wallet overflowing with cash but returns it, refusing even a penny. The wealthy businessman who owns it is haunted by the boy's selflessness and, months later, tracks him down, only to uncover a devastating truth. The boy's mother died while working in one of his buildings, unnoticed and forgotten. Shattered by guilt and the weight of his past, the businessman fights to make amends, while the boy wrestles with the pain of his loss. Will the truth prove too heavy for forgiveness? The biting wind chased 11-year-old Javi down the streets of Mariposa Heights, a neighborhood carved from hard edges and broken promises. His sneakers, their soles nearly flapping loose, slapped against the uneven pavement as he searched for something to fill his aching stomach. He paused by a bakery, the scent of warm bread swirling around him like a cruel taunt. Inside, customers laughed softly over steaming cups of coffee, oblivious to the small boy watching from the fogged window. Javi tucked his fingers into his frayed jacket pockets to keep them warm. His hands brushed against a shard of hope, a crumpled receipt from the shelter meal he'd missed the night before. Maybe they'd still have leftovers. He turned to walk away when something unusual caught his eye. A black leather wallet, plump and slightly weathered, lying half-hidden in the gutter. The sight of it made his heart thrum with anticipation. Crouching down, he picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside were crisp bills, more money than Javi had seen in his entire life. A shiny credit card winked at him beneath a driver's license. The photo on the card showed a man in his late 40s with kind eyes but a tense jaw, like he smiled more out of obligation than joy. The name read, Victor Perez. Javi stared at the bills, his stomach twisting. He could feel his mother's voice whispering in his ear, as though she were still alive. You're never poor enough to lose your soul, Javi. Honesty is what makes us strong. For a moment, the weight of hunger fought against her memory. Then, as if deciding for him, Javi snapped the wallet shut. His hands trembled as he clutched it tightly, though whether from hunger or conviction he couldn't tell. Victor Perez leaned back in the soft leather seat of his car, trying not to let the chaos of his schedule derail his thoughts. He was a man who lived by order and precision, a necessity for running one of the city's most lucrative real estate firms. Yet today, he felt oddly disoriented. A few hours earlier, he had dropped his wallet during a call. By the time he noticed, it was long gone. His assistant assured him he'd cancel the cards, but something about the loss gnawed at Victor. The wallet itself wasn't special, it was the principle. He hated loose ends, especially when they slipped out of his control. Things are replaceable, he muttered under his breath, but he knew this wasn't about money. It was about a life spent guarding against mistakes like this. As he stared out the car window at the busy streets, he felt a curious pang. Somewhere deep in his bones, Victor knew his life had taken a turn. A quiet, steady descent he hadn't noticed until it was too late. His luxurious home was empty, his relationships shallow. The pieces of his success had formed a brittle shell around him, and the loss of the wallet felt like a symbolic crack in that facade. Javi found a police station 2 miles away, the walk leaving his thin legs shaking from exhaustion. The officer at the front desk raised a skeptical eyebrow when Javi handed over the wallet. "You found this, huh?" the man asked, glancing between Javi and the wallet as if expecting a confession. "Yes, sir," Javi said quietly, keeping his gaze steady. He thought of running, of disappearing into the streets, but he stood his ground. The officer softened after a moment, muttering, "Not many people would have done this, kid." He handed Javi a plastic bag of crackers and a small bottle of water. Javi murmured thanks, took the food, and left before the man could ask too many questions. 3 days later, Victor Perez walked into the police station after a call from the precinct. He thumbed through the wallet, noting everything was still intact. The officer told him about the boy who had returned it, but there was no contact information. All he had was a first name, Javi. Victor hesitated at the desk, clutching the wallet. "And he didn't take a reward?" The officer shook his head. "Didn't want it. He just asked if we'd make sure you got it back." Something twisted in Victor's chest. The boy's actions unsettled him. In a city full of people chasing wealth, Javi's integrity felt like a rare and foreign currency. Victor left the station that day with more questions than answers. The next few weeks unfolded with relentless regularity. Victor tried to put the incident out of his mind, yet he found himself thinking about Javi often. Who was this boy? What kind of life did he live? And why did his small act of honesty feel so monumental? Victor couldn't help but wonder if his younger self would have done the same. One late evening, after a particularly empty dinner in his sprawling house, Victor made a decision. He called in favors, seeking any lead on the boy who had returned his wallet. What started as idle curiosity became an obsession. The world was full of people who would have taken the cash without a second thought. Yet this boy had done something extraordinary. Victor needed to know why. Meanwhile, Javi's days grew harsher. Winter crept into the city, bringing biting winds that seeped through his thin jacket. The shelter beds filled faster each night, leaving him to huddle in alleys or under park benches. Hunger gnawed at him constantly, but he held on to his mother's memory, letting it guide him. Her words became a mantra. Honesty is what makes us strong. One particularly cold night, Javi found himself staring up at the stars, his stomach growling, his body shaking. He whispered a prayer he wasn't sure anyone would hear. "Help me, please. Just one more chance to prove I can make it." What Javi didn't know was that Victor Perez was closer than he could have imagined. The boy's life about to change in ways neither of them could foresee. Victor Perez had made inquiries in places he had never thought to step into. Community centers, food banks, even the shelter system. Each new lead on Javi was a faint whisper, barely audible above the noise of the city. Yet, through persistent effort, Victor began piecing together fragments of the boy's life. "He's around sometimes," one shelter volunteer told him, her voice tinged with sympathy. "Quiet kid. Keeps to himself. You might find him over by that old park on Harrison Street." Victor found himself on Harrison Street the next evening, his breath curling in small puffs against the cold. The park was nearly abandoned except for the distant figure of a boy sitting on a bench, his knees pulled to his chest. Victor approached cautiously, unsure how to begin. "Javi," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. The boy's head snapped up, his dark eyes wary but sharp. He recognized the man from the photo in the wallet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Javi stood, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets as if preparing to flee. "I just wanted to thank you," Victor said quickly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "For what you did. You returned my wallet when you didn't have to." "You said thank you already," Javi muttered, his voice guarded. At the station, Victor hesitated, sensing the boy's discomfort. "I wanted to do more than just say it. Do you need anything? A warm meal? A place to stay?" Javi's face hardened. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Victor said. "It's gratitude." The boy shook his head, his lips pressing into a firm line. "I didn't do it for money. I'm not like that." Victor's chest tightened at the boy's quiet pride. "I know," he said, his voice gentler now. "That's why I'm here." Javi stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching against the frosted grass. Victor didn't give up. Over the next few weeks, he began visiting Harrison Street more frequently, bringing warm food or blankets in hopes of catching Javi again. Sometimes he would leave them in places he thought the boy might pass. Each time, he found himself reflecting on Javi's resilience and independence, qualities he admired but also found troubling for someone so young. On one of these evenings, as Victor placed a small package of sandwiches near a park bench, a voice startled him. "You don't have to keep doing that." Victor turned to see Javi standing a few feet away, his thin frame half hidden in the shadows. The boy's face was guarded, but there was a flicker of something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "I don't mind," Victor said. "I thought you might be hungry." Javi hesitated, then slowly approached. He didn't take the sandwiches right away, but sat down on the bench, keeping a wary distance. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice low. "You don't even know me." Victor sat down beside him, leaving space between them. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, about why you did what you did. You remind me of someone I used to know." Javi looked at him sideways, suspicion mingling with interest. "Who?" Victor hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "Myself," he admitted finally. "A long time ago." Javi frowned, clearly doubtful. You don't look like someone who's ever been hungry." Victor gave a faint, humorless smile. Not anymore. But I know what it's like to have nothing. The boy studied him for a moment, as if weighing the truth of his word. Then, for the first time, he reached for the sandwich, unwrapping it slowly. He took a cautious bite, his eyes still on Victor. So, what happened? How'd you go from nothing to all this? Victor exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. It's a long story, but the short version? Someone gave me a chance. Javi didn't respond right away, chewing thoughtfully. Then he asked, "Why would anyone do that?" "Because they believed I could be more than what I was," Victor said. He paused, his voice softening. "Just like I believe in you." The words seemed to unsettle Javi. He finished the sandwich quickly, then stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "Thanks," he muttered before walking off into the night. Victor watched him go, a growing resolve building in his chest. This wasn't enough. He needed to do more. As the weeks passed, Victor's visits became more deliberate. He began speaking with community leaders, asking about the gaps in the system that left kids like Javi slipping through the cracks. He learned about the failures of foster care, the overcrowded shelters, the cycles of poverty that seemed impossible to break. At the same time, Javi began to let his guard down, just slightly. He started meeting Victor more regularly, though he kept the man at arm's length. Their conversations were brief, but each one gave Victor a deeper glimpse into the boy's life. One evening, Javi revealed something that left Victor speechless. "My mom used to work in one of your buildings," the boy said quietly, staring at the ground. "She was a cleaner. She used to say the people there were too busy looking at the sky to notice the ground beneath them." Victor felt the weight of those words settle over him like a heavy cloak. "What happened to her?" Javi's face tightened, his jaw clenched. "She got sick, real sick. By the time she went to the doctor, it was too late." The boy's voice broke on the last word, and he quickly turned away, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. Victor's heart ached as he listened, the boy's pain striking a chord he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but he knew Javi wouldn't accept it. Not yet. The more Victor learned about Javi, the more determined he became to help him. But it wasn't just about the boy anymore. Javi's story had ignited something in Victor, a longing to reconcile with his own past, to confront the emptiness that had taken root in his life. What neither of them realized was that their connection ran deeper than either could have imagined. A truth lay buried in the fragments of their stories, waiting to be uncovered. A truth that would change both of their lives forever. The chill of winter deepened, wrapping the city in layers of frost. For Javi, the days grew shorter and crueler. His thin jacket did little against the biting cold, and hunger gnawed at him like an unrelenting shadow. Yet, despite his hardships, a reluctant trust had begun to grow between him and Victor Perez. It was fragile, like a spider's web strung between two uneven branches, but it held. Victor, in turn, became more restless with each passing day. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Javi's story, more than the boy's stubborn pride and raw resilience. And the more time Victor spent with Javi, the more he saw his younger self reflected in the boy's defiant eyes. But there was a difference. Javi had integrity in a way Victor never had at that age. He carried a quiet dignity even in the face of suffering, a strength Victor both admired and envied. One evening, Victor invited Javi to join him for dinner at a small diner near the park. The boy hesitated but eventually agreed, lured by the promise of warmth and a hot meal. They sat in a corner booth, the scent of grilled burgers and fried onions filling the air. Javi ate quickly, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to take the food away. Victor watched him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to rush, you know." Javi wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Old habit," he mumbled, avoiding Victor's gaze. They fell into a companionable silence, the hum of the diner providing a comforting backdrop. After a while, Javi leaned back in his seat, his face flushed from the warmth of the room. He seemed younger in that moment, the weight of the world momentarily lifted from his thin shoulders. "I wanted to ask you something," Victor said carefully, breaking the silence. "Your mom? What was her name?" Javi's expression darkened, and he hesitated before answering. "Rosa," he said softly. "Rosa Castillo." Victor froze. The name hit him like a blow to the chest, a memory surfacing unbidden. Rosa Castillo. He remembered her. She had worked as a cleaner in one of his buildings years ago. She was always polite, her dark eyes warm and kind, but there had been a quiet sadness about her, as if she carried a weight too heavy for one person to bear. "She worked in one of my offices," Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize." Javi's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his face. "Realize what?" Victor hesitated, guilt twisting in his chest. "That she was struggling, that she was sick. I should have—" He stopped himself, knowing the words would sound hollow. There was no undoing the past. Javi's jaw tightened, and he pushed his plate away. "You didn't care. Nobody did. She was just the cleaning lady to you." The boy's words cut deep, and Victor felt a pang of shame. He wanted to protest, to explain that he hadn't known, but he also knew Javi was right. He had been too consumed with his own ambitions to notice the people around him, people like Rosa, who had quietly faded into the background. "I'm sorry," Victor said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't see her, but I see you, Javi, and I want to help." Javi stood abruptly, his face a mask of anger and pain. "I don't need your help," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been fine without you." He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Victor sitting alone in the booth. The older man's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him like a leaden cloak. The next morning, Victor made a decision. He couldn't change the past, but he could do something now, something that might make a difference. He started by reaching out to an old colleague who ran a nonprofit organization focused on helping homeless youth. Together, they began laying the groundwork for a new program, one that would provide shelter, education, and opportunities for kids like Javi. But Victor wasn't content to stop there. He wanted to find Javi, to tell him about the program, to show him that someone cared. He searched the streets and the shelters, asking anyone who might have seen the boy. Days turned into weeks, and still, Javi remained elusive. Meanwhile, Javi wrestled with his own turmoil. The revelation about Victor's connection to his mother had shaken him deeply. He felt betrayed, angry, and confused. But beneath the anger was a flicker of something else. Hope. For the first time in years, someone had noticed him, cared enough to try. It was a feeling he didn't know how to handle. One night, as he huddled beneath a threadbare blanket in an abandoned building, Javi pulled out a small photo he kept hidden in his pocket. It was of him and his mother, taken when he was barely 6 years old. Her smile was warm, her arms wrapped protectively around him. He traced her face with his finger, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. "I miss you, Mama," he whispered. "What should I do?" The turning point came on a frigid January morning. Victor was leaving the community center after another fruitless search when he spotted a familiar figure across the street. Javi stood near a group of boys, his thin frame hunched against the cold. Victor called out to him, his voice firm but gentle. "Javi, please, just give me a chance." The boy hesitated, his gaze darting between Victor and the group. Finally, he stepped forward, his expression guarded but curious. "What do you want from me?" Javi asked, his voice wary. Victor took a deep breath, his eyes earnest. "I don't want anything from you. I want to give you something, a future, but I need you to trust me." Javi stared at him for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, with a small nod, he said, "Okay." The two of them stood in the cold, a tenuous truce forming between them. Neither of them realized that this moment, this fragile beginning, would lead to a transformation neither of them could have imagined. Javi followed Victor into the warmth of the community center, his steps tentative and his eyes scanning the room with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint, the walls adorned with bright posters detailing programs for kids in need. Victor led him to a quiet office, offering him a chair and a cup of hot cocoa. "You've been on your own for a long time," Victor began, sitting across from Javi. "That's not fair for a kid your age." Javi wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his frozen fingers. "Fair doesn't matter," he replied. "You just do what you have to." Victor leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You don't have to anymore. I've been working on something, a program for kids like you, A place where you can stay, go to school, have meals, have a chance. Javi's brow furrowed, and he set the mug down. Why are you doing this? For me? Victor hesitated. He knew this was the moment to be completely honest. Because I owe you, he said softly. I didn't see your mother when she needed help. I can't change what happened, but I can do something now, for you. Javi's gaze dropped to the floor, his jaw tight. You didn't make her sick. You couldn't have saved her. No, Victor agreed. But I could have made her life a little easier. And maybe, just maybe, she'd still be here, watching you grow up. Instead, you've had to carry a burden no child should. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the distant hum of activity outside. Finally, Javi looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. She used to say people only see what they want to see. Maybe now you're looking? Victor felt a lump rise in his throat. I am, and I'm not going to stop. The weeks that followed were a slow but steady transformation. Javi moved into a transitional home run by the nonprofit Victor had helped fund. His days filled with structured activities, counseling, and the simple joys of childhood he'd long forgotten. At first, he kept his distance from the other kids, his mistrust a shield he couldn't yet lower. But as the days turned to weeks, cracks began to form in his armor. Victor visited often, bringing books and supplies, or simply sitting with Javi to talk. Their conversations ranged from trivial topics to deeper truths about life, grief, and the struggles they both had faced. Victor didn't push, and Javi, in turn, began to share more. About his mother, about the nights he spent alone on the streets, about the guilt he carried for not being able to save her. One cold evening, as Victor sat with Javi in the common room of the center, the boy pulled something from his pocket. It was the photo of him and his mother, worn and creased from years of handling. She was always smiling, Javi said, his voice soft. Even when things were hard, she said if you smiled enough, people wouldn't see how scared you were. Victor took the photo carefully, his fingers brushing the edges of the worn paper. She was brave, and she loved you more than anything. That kind of love doesn't go away, Javi. It stays with you. The boy looked away, blinking rapidly. I just wish she was here. I don't know how to do this without her. Victor set the photo down gently on the table between them. You're not alone anymore. You've got people who care about you. You've got me. Javi's shoulders sagged, the weight of his grief finally beginning to lift. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe those words. The months passed, and Javi began to thrive. He returned to school, his natural curiosity and sharp mind quickly making up for lost time. He joined a soccer team, his wiry frame perfect for darting through defenders. The once cautious boy who had survived on instinct and grit began to laugh again, his smile lighting up the room. For Victor, watching Javi grow was a bittersweet experience. The boy's resilience reminded him of his own struggles, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He threw himself into expanding the nonprofit, using his resources and connections to create lasting change for kids like Javi. For the first time in a long while, he felt like his life had meaning beyond the next deal or acquisition. One afternoon, as they walked together through the park where they had first met, Javi stopped suddenly, his eyes scanning the frozen grass. What is it? Victor asked. Javi bent down and picked up something from the ground. It was an old wallet, worn and frayed, much like the one he'd found months ago. He held it up with a small, mischievous grin. Déjà vu, Victor laughed, the sound rich and full. So, what are you going to do with it? Javi opened the wallet, his brow furrowing as he examined its contents. Then he glanced up at Victor, his eyes sparkling. Return it, of course. It's the honest thing to do. Victor felt a swell of pride, his throat tightening with emotion. You've got a good heart, Javi. The boy shrugged, slipping the wallet into his pocket. I had a good teacher. As they walked back to the community center, Victor placed a hand on Javi's shoulder. For the first time in years, the emptiness that had haunted him was gone. In its place was a quiet contentment, the kind that comes from knowing you've made a difference in someone's life and allowed them to make a difference in yours. Javi glanced up at him, a small smile playing at his lips. Thanks, Victor, for everything. Victor nodded, his voice steady. Thank you, Javi. You reminded me of what really matters. In the years to come, their bond would grow stronger, their lives intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. Javi's journey wasn't over, but he faced it with hope, strength, and the knowledge that he was no longer alone. And for Victor, helping Javi had not only given him purpose, it had given him a family. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to HeroKind Stories and share your thoughts in the comments. What moment touched you the most? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you.